Hello once again and welcome back to Herd Immunity News. I'm Marcus Botzer. Today it gives me great delight to welcome back onto our platform Mr. Ben Habib. Ben is a former MEP with the Brexit Party and he's former Deputy Leader with Reform. But without further ado, can I just say, Ben, how are you, sir?
I'm very well indeed, Marcus. How are you? And thank you for having me on your show.
Well, it's our pleasure to have you back onto this platform, and there is so much to discuss. So, the Keir Starmer regime has given us so much material, those of us on the alternative platforms, X and YouTube and things like of that nature. But it really is where a lot of people are getting the news, because the mainstream media is unbelievable in how they redact and alter reality. I'm sure you have something to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's, I turned on the news this morning. Not this morning, last night. I was watching Sky News last night, and they're going on about Israeli atrocities in Gaza. And I just thought, there's so much else going on. Why are they focusing on this? Right? I mean, I'm not saying that one shouldn't be concerned about potential atrocities anywhere in the world, but they just bang on and on and on about it. And there's so much else going on in the world. And if they were going to focus on atrocities, they could talk about what had just happened in Syria, what is unfolding in Syria right now, what happened in Germany over the weekend, bring it up to date. Anyway, they've got their little bugbears and they just keep,
It's very telling, isn't it, what they don't say? As well as what they do say and the way they spin things. But today we're going to give people a kind of good news, bad news story. And it's picking up on something that you said during the Peter McCormick interview, which we loved and we recommend people watch, because it's Ben Habib for over about an hour and a half.
That's really bad luck.
I'm sure you had the energy to go through for 10 hours if need be. But it was on the economy. Now, the good news for a lot of people is that Keir Starmer and this Labour regime may be off the premises before 2029. The bad news is that the British economy will have to crash and have a balance of payments crisis in order to do this. And when we look at all the economic indicators point to that very eventuality, with the increase in taxation, all the sort of things that all the things that could go wrong are going wrong. When we look at the last quarter, the scores on the doors are out for the last quarter on our percentage growth. It's 0.1. We're up there with Germany in the G7. And we look close to tanking. But could you just elaborate, please, on the financial crisis that you see heading towards the UK?
So if I might just start a little further back, people tend to talk about taxation, in my view, wrongly, as part of the political landscape. And I don't see particular forms of tax or the overall taxation burden on the economy as an ideological thing. For me, it is taxation is a tool that government should use to fund itself, obviously, to the extent it needs to be funded, but also to ensure that the economy is flying along as best possible without overheating. And so it's an amoral, apolitical tool. You use it as best you can to make sure that the economic organism is behaving as best it can. And what seems quite obvious to me sitting outside government is that if you have had progressive increases in taxation, as we have done over the last 30 odd years, and we're now carrying a burden that is higher than at any point since World War II as a proportion of GDP, and the economy isn't responding, it stands to reason that it's best to go in the other direction. Even if you've got no particular view on human nature and how it reacts to taxation and where we are on any given tax, just the fact that the pendulum has swung so far over towards a massive tax burden, as I say, the biggest one since World War II, would lead any individual inside government, outside government to, I think, make the case that really the taxation burden needs to come down if the economic organism isn't surviving under the current burden. What you can't do And what should be obvious, I would have thought, is that increasing taxation at a point when the economy already has so much taxation on it and is suffering is only going to exacerbate the problem. And I think we all intuitively know, and it's best exemplified by the following, which is that if you tax everyone 100% of their earnings, no one's going to work, right? No one's going to work. And if you tax everyone 0%, the government goes bust. So there's an optimum level of taxation in the middle there somewhere. And in my view, and as evidenced by the economy being under the pressure that it's at and the massive taxation burden the economy is carrying, taxes are way too high at the moment and they need to come back. And what we've had over the last 30 years is increasing government in all its forms, increasing regulation and increasing taxation. And in order to fund its agendas, its ideological positions, governments have taxed us more and more and more. And they've also, alongside that, imported cheap labor, which has created other burdens for the economy, which we can talk about. But just looking at taxation, they've taxed their way progressively into a position where they can do whatever it is that they wish to do with the money. And we've reached a point now, I thought we'd reached it, and I think we had reached it, frankly, under Rishi Sunak, where we couldn't take any more. But this government came in and it thought that it can somehow burden the economy yet again. And they made a couple of immediate mistakes, in my view. The first was signaling 2 months out from the budget that there would be significant tax rises coming in the budget. That, of course, got everyone in the economy scared. Businesses reacted to it. The city reacted to it. High net worth individuals reacted to it. All those reactions were reduction in economic activity, either selling shares and exiting the country, or simply not investing because you're fearful of what's coming around the corner. So the way they led themselves into the increases in taxation that they did was really bad. And we already began to see an economic, malaise setting in just by their signaling. And then when the budget was released, it did precisely what it really shouldn't have done, which was target working class people, those in work, by raising employers' national insurance. And it did it regressively. And I say that because it reduced the hurdle rate at which employers' NI is charged, up from £9,000 per annum to £5,000 per annum, hitting in the pockets the lowest paid in the economy the hardest. Labour Party actually did a regressive form of tax increases. The rich can actually take the burden of an increase in NI. It's not them that's going to be hit. It's the small, medium-sized businesses who can't take it, have to either then not give people salary increases, damaging the working class, or sacking people in their employment, damaging the working class, or frankly going bust, because that is where some businesses are going to go. And alongside the increase in employers' national insurance, they also increase business rates. And the hospitality sector is already suffering, hugely. Your backdrop is a pub. Pubs have been in the crosshairs of bad government policy from lockdown, from before lockdown, through to now, including obviously with increasing business rates, etc. So the hospitality sector, small and medium-sized businesses, charities, also, as it happens, all were seriously hit by the budget. And what we immediately saw was a downturn in activity. And you see that in the PMI figures, the purchasing managers indices, which are forward-looking managers telling, disclosing whether or not they're going to be buying stuff or hiring people. And all those indicators are below 50. And when they're below 50, that signaling a recession is coming down the tracks. And it all virtually instantly went below 50. And at the same time as increasing all these taxes, what people haven't really focused on that much is the spending increases that went in the last budget. So there were around 36 to 40 billion pounds worth of tax increases, but the overall spending increase was £70 billion per annum. And that was after she said, the government said, Labour Party, Rachel Reeves said, that there was a £22 billion black hole. Now, the instinctive reaction to any sane individual, by any sane individual to a black hole is to pare back spending.
Yes.
Actually, she's increased it by 70 billion per annum. And the OBR, the Office of Budget Responsibility, when it looked at her budget, said it's on a knife edge. If the taxation revenue comes in, you may be able to fund the 34 billion shortfall you've got through raising government debt. But of course, that presupposes, as I just said, that the economy doesn't suffer. Now what we're seeing, as I mentioned, is the economy going down. So she's not going to collect the 36 to 40 billion pounds per annum that she was expecting. And because the economy is going down, sterling is going down. So we are importing inflation. Businesses are passing on the higher burden of tax to their customers by increasing prices, which is also inflationary. And the government the government borrowing requirement, is increasing because she's not going to be getting as much tax as she had expected when she did the budget. So you've got a sort of triple whammy of weakening sterling, higher inflation, more government borrowing being required, and the Bank of England not being able to cut interest rates because of the higher inflation, further damaging the economy. So what we've got is a downward spiral in our economic circumstances. And the government is going to reap the ill winds of that downward spiral by its inability to fund an increasing deficit. So as I mentioned, the OBR kind of signed off on 30 to 34 billion of additional borrowing each year that she might be able to finance on the presumption that the economy doesn't shrink. But if she needs to borrow 40 or 45 billion a year and the economy is tanking, she would have created a sovereign debt crisis for the United Kingdom. She will not be able to fund her debt requirements. And it would be false to think that the Bank of England can come to the rescue and just print the money like it did during lockdowns.
No.
That ship has sailed. There's no more printing of money capable of taking place, because if the Bank of England were to print money to bail the government out, you'd see sterling tank because the dollar ain't being printed, the yen ain't being printed, the euro's not being printed. So sterling, there'd be a surfeit of sterling in the market and it would just go through the floor. Inflation would go right. You'd have hyperinflation and you'd have a Zimbabwe type economy. So the Bank of England's not coming to the rescue. And I think there is a really good chance that we're going to see a sovereign debt crisis in the United Kingdom within the next 6 to 9 months as a result of the last budget. Sorry, that was a very long-winded way to get to where I got to, but that's how I see it.
We could speak about the problems that have been manufactured in our economy for hours.
Yeah.
We'd probably be here 10 hours later. We'd have to go back in time, I would suggest, to Nigel Lawson, who was perhaps the last sound economic chancellor that we had when Lawson in the mid-80s, I don't know if you remember this, Ben, he reduced the 29p in the pound to 25p in the pound, and he put the top rate of tax at 40p. But they don't get, or they won't get, the fact that the lower the tax burden on employers and on the working public, then the greater the yields.
Absolutely. I mean, if you can earn a fair wage and you get to keep your wage, you're incentivized to work. I don't have, everyone in my company is pretty highly paid because we run a fund management business in the West End of London. But yesterday, 22nd of December, I was having emails with our lawyer and my head of property because we're trying to close the deal before Christmas. Now, we're all motivated to close the deal before Christmas because we're all going to make money out of that deal. And
that's how that works.
It's amazing. So I was talking to my right-hand man, guy called Martin Price, who works with me yesterday on Sunday, thinking, I wouldn't be able to have this conversation with Martin if he didn't have a stake in the business. And a stake in the business, for a stake in the business, equally read a stake in your welfare, a stake in one's own ability to guide one's own life. You know, that key element of our spirit, which is aspiration, a desire to get on and be better. And what successive governments have done with their high taxation and low wage strategy is effectively drive aspiration and ambition out of the economy, out of the people, for a large number of people in this country. I'm not saying we're all without it, but you know, when you can get on benefits, pretty much what you can get as a net median wage earner, when there's not much of a gap, benefits becomes a lifestyle choice, you know, and that's why we've got 7.2 million people. 7.2 million people in this country on universal credit. Last year, the figure was bad enough at 6. It's gone up by 1.2 million people in a year. And before lockdowns, it was at 3 million. And in 2018, it was 1 million on universal credit. Yeah. Just think of the massive deterioration we've seen in our working people in this country. And of course, if the country's not working, as you rightly pointed out, Marcus, there will be less revenue for the government. And so what they don't realize is the more they're taxing us, the more they're killing the goose that lays the golden egg. And the less productive that goose is, you know, they're damaging the goose. The goose is going to be less productive. They'll get less money. More people will be on benefits. And when someone loses their job, they cease to pay tax to the government and they become a taker from the government. It's not just that you lose the tax income. The government actually picks up a burden. It's a double whammy. And I mean, you know, what can I say? We're in a really bad place.
We are, and things will have to get worse before they get better, as the saying goes. And that might be a nice segue into our relationship with the United States. Now, the United States look to be on a completely different trajectory, politically and ideologically and economically, to the one that Starmer is taking the United Kingdom on. And what really must have shocked a lot of people or sickened a lot of people was to see Lord Mandelson, Lord Mandelson making his return, the arch-Europhile himself, a man whose background is with the Communist Party, Ben. And
he's an awful, awful man, sidling up to Russians, embedding us in the relations with Russians, embedding us in relations with China, an arch-Europhile, what I would call an anti-democrat and anti-British individual.
Absolutely. I mean, the man's had to resign twice in complete disgrace over improprieties, which will be people can check out online. I've posted a lot of them up on Twitter, and people can check out for themselves. But what disgusts a lot of people is, as well as David Lammy making those hideous comments about Donald Trump being akin to a KKK supporter and a neo-Nazi. This is our foreign secretary here, Mastermind Lammy. We bring in Mandelson, Lord Mandelson of Hartlepool, who said that Donald Trump is little more than a white supremacist and nationalist. Now, you couldn't really choose anyone worse. And it seems almost like Keir Starmer is putting a wedge between us and the United States and an economy that's going to be flourishing on drill, baby, drill. What's not to love about that? Fossil fuels, a nice bit of fracking thrown in as well. But Starmer's aligning us with the collapsing economy of the Eurozone. I mean, what do you make of this, Ben?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing Starmer did when Trump was elected was to fly straight to France and have a chat with Macron. I don't know if you remember that.
And parade round in the little Tonka truck.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, quite, which shows his contempt for democracy in a visual way. Yes. But, you know, these people, Trump's agenda, everything he set out is an agenda that I completely subscribe to. You know, strong borders, deregulate, get rid of net zero, cut taxes, and impose tariffs. You know, global trade, again, is an amoral subject. It cannot be an ideologically driven one. And what we've done far too much is global trade. In our pursuit of cheap goods, we've created geopolitical instability in the world with a massively strong China. China is militarily strong because we gave it the cash to make it militarily strong. Moreover, we've hollowed out some of our key strategic industries and handed them over to foreign entities. Theresa May was going to give over the establishment of a nuclear power station to China. Do you remember? We were going to have Huawei in our 5G system.
Boris was going to bring in Huawei, wasn't he? For the Five Eyes project would have been completely handed over to the Chinese. And now Starmer's handed over the Chagos Islands to effectively the Chinese.
And Starmer is of that ilk. And so he looks at Trump. And he thinks, oh my goodness, this man's going to set back global trade. He's going to set back that global integration, that liberal global order of which Starmer is such a firm member, and Mandelson is such a firm member. And they're repulsed by it. But actually what Trump is doing is recognizing we've had too much global trade, too high a regulatory burden right across the Western world, too high a rate of taxation across the Western world, which goes with the high regulations and big government, and it all needs to be reversed. And in reversing it for the US, he's going to make the US even more economically successful than it is. And by the way, the US is economically successful right now. By comparison to us, it's in a different league, miles ahead of us. But if he supercharges the US, the other effect that we will experience in the UK is a withdrawal of capital from the UK, from international investors, and moving it to the US. We will see a further damaging of the United Kingdom as a result of the right policies being put in place for the US. So if Starmer doesn't get on board with Trump's policies, he's going to exacerbate the problems he's already created for the UK. The only way to respond to Trump is actually ourselves to ditch net zero, deregulate, cut taxes, because that will pivot trade away from America back to us. And let me tell you, even though I'm a friend of the US, we're competitors on the international stage. We must compete with the US just like they would compete with us. When he says America first, he doesn't mean America first with the exception of the United Kingdom. He means America first, including the United Kingdom. And we've got to start thinking like that.
Perfect. That's what a leader of a nation should do.
Absolutely.
Their economy first. I mean, the United States is a key partner of ours because we have a trade surplus. This is something that you hear the likes of Mandelson, Blair in his day, and Alistair Campbell, wash my mouth out, would say that the EU is our biggest trading partner, but the trade deficit with the EU is monumental. It's nearly 100 billion pounds, whereas our surplus with the United States, our surplus, this is money that will save us, is 71 billion at last count. I mean, this is insanity from Mandelson.
Couldn't agree more. We've carried, as you rightly say, Marcus, a trade deficit with the EU of 100 billion year in, year out for at least a decade. I would have to go back and check the numbers.
1972 was the last time that we had a surplus with them.
Okay.
And that was when we started.
So we've basically, that's a really interesting stat. That basically means we've hollowed out our economy for the benefit of the EU. That's what's happened. 100 billion out. It's a huge pressure on sterling. Huge pressure on sterling and our wealth if we're constantly having to pay out more to the EU than we're getting in from the EU. No, what we've got to do is wean ourselves off the cartel that is the European, the sclerotic, socialist, imploding as it happens, economic cartel that is the EU. I mean, look at the EU. People say, oh, Brexit's caused damage to the British economy. Look at France. It's technically bust. Look at Germany. Germany's having an economic cardiac arrest on the back of net zero. A completely self-created cardiac arrest because they've decided that their brilliant Volkswagen cars, their Porsches, their Mercedes, their BMWs are no longer good enough for the world. They're going to change their entire economic model to suit an ideology that came out of Brussels.
Yeah, I mean, you really let's bring China in now. Let's bring China into this because mass immigration and net zero, the two biggest damaging projects, and I throw in taxation as well. But it seems like the EU and the UK, and I agree with you, we're still really part of the EU. We had Brexit in name only. I agree with you 100% on that one, Ben. China seems to have such a hold over both the EU and the United Kingdom. I mean, I don't know what your thoughts are, and it's rising. The ugly head rises all the time when there are scandals like the latest one we heard about Prince Andrew and his associations with a Chinese spy. But this isn't an isolated story. The same gentleman has linked to Theresa May, David Cameron, and Barry Gardner. Of course, he had his situation with a female.
Barry Gardner, did he?
Yeah, and Jeremy Hunt's wife. Yeah. Jeremy Hunt's wife worked for the CCP in their media department. So it must concern you greatly, the relationship and the power and influence that China has over the UK.
I think we've sleptwalked into a really difficult geopolitical position because of people like Mandelson, Blair, Gordon Brown, Cameron, all of whom embraced China. And Starmer is still embracing China. You know, he's still. And what we should have done was actually kept production more in the UK. It goes back again to Trump's agenda of imposing tariffs, protecting producers in the United States, protect producers in the United Kingdom, and make sure that at least strategic industries stay local, that they don't go abroad. But now what we've got, I mean, it's great. You look at aerial photographs of Shanghai over the last 30 years, and you will see Shanghai goes from basically looking like a fishing village to looking like something that is like, I mean, it makes London look like a fishing village now. Frankly, that's the transformation that China's been through. And they've got fifth generation fighters. They've got stealth ships. They're building military bases, literally building islands in the South China Sea on which they can, park their military jets. And they're flying sorties over Taiwan and blockading Taiwan from time to time whenever, they wish to do it. They're flexing their muscles, and their muscles have been given to them by us. I mean, we can talk about the stupidity of Prince Andrew getting out H6 or Yang Bao, or whatever his name is. Yeah. But actually, this has been going on in full public view for the last 30 years. And every successive administration is guilty of too much trade and too much sidling up with China.
And it's to our detriment completely.
Massive.
Because we seem to have, our universities, for example, are on the hook for about £40 billion a year in annual funding from the CCP. Oxford, obviously the home of a lot of this, and it has been for decades. I mean, we're quite severe on these people that put other nations ahead of our own. We call them traitors, Ben. Because now, if you put a nation's interest, a foreign nation's interest ahead of your own at the detriment to your own people, then I'm sorry, but that is a complete betrayal. And
it is a betrayal, absolutely.
The burgeoning of the CCP and nations, we looked at the emerging economies of the world right now. You've got India looking at a GDP growth of 6.7%. Philippines, 6%, Vietnam, 5.8%, Indonesia, 5%, China, 4.7%, and the world average is 2.9%. Here are we, Ben, trailing along like the faithful dog tray at 0.1% growth. Now, when Starmer was talking about growth, I think he was talking about a national debt, the population of the UK and the size of the state. But shouldn't we be just ditching this net zero argument completely and going back to reliable fossil fuels?
Absolutely.
And fracking.
Absolutely. We should ditch net zero. We should do it absolutely instantly. And it doesn't mean that we don't care about the planet, or we don't need to get into the planetary debate, whether or not we're all about to burn up and die. Yeah. Even if man-made climate change is a thing, even if it is a thing, let's just say they're right. There is man-made climate change coming from carbon emissions globally. Net zero, as being practiced by the UK and Western economies, is not the answer. That is not the answer. What you don't do, you do not economically emasculate yourself in the pursuit of an ideology. Sure, we can cut our carbon emissions to zero and we'll all just be living in caves. I
think that's the model. I think that's the plan. And it is quite disgusting when you see the hobbling of our country and the way that fossil fuels. I live in a I live very close to the Grangemouth oil refinery up in Scotland.
Yeah.
And we're shutting this down, and it will completely collapse the Scottish economy, leaving us with next to nothing, leaving us with net zero. That's what will be left in our coffers. But when you look at as I say, the emerging economies of this world, none of them are doing it through net zero or green energy. And you get people like Ed Miliband. I mean, you wouldn't let this man clean the cars in your car park. He's another communist. He's another with Marxist parents and well-known Marxist ideologies. I mean, these things can be debunked in seconds that CO2 is actually good for the planet. You can't remove CO2.
Yeah.
And even
I don't have that. I don't even go to have that debate, because it's a religious debate.
It is.
You and I will agree, but people who think the world's about to burn up will never, presented with any amount of information, they won't change their position, because that is their position. When I was a child, I don't know how old you are, Marcus, but in the 70s, we all thought we were about to enter another ice age. That was the fear, that we were going to freeze up.
Yeah. And the king has been pushing this, God bless him. Let's just be polite and say the king's been very poorly advised all of his life, because he bangs on about this stuff, and then the hypocrisies, they fly off. Starmer is doing the Blair miles. He's staying out the country as long as he possibly can. They're taking delegates over, a couple of hundred delegates over to talk about climate change and burning fossil fuels. It's like Monty Python sketch, really, isn't it? I know you're a big Monty Python fan, but we've been hearing this garbage for 50, 60 years. And you actually take it back further, the Nazi regime were big green fans themselves. There's an excellent book called Green Tyranny by Rupert Darwell. And Rupert completely trashes all of these ideologies. As you say, it's more like a religion. It's nothing to do with
I didn't know the Nazis had a big green agenda, did they?
Yeah. The Nazis were huge on this, because it was part of totalitarian regime, a technocracy that we saw during the lockdowns and things like that. Now, Trump has announced, God bless him, we are unabashed, unashamed Trump fans. We love the man. I mean, he's half Scottish as well, so I might be related to him a bit. I never got his hair, but
you might be his son.
Might be a job for me at the White House. Might be a job for me at the White House. But looking at that, the Trump model and the Starmer model, completely opposed. Trump is going to be using the powers that he has at his disposal to deport people, and a deportation system and program that we've never seen the likes of before. With Tom Homan, his fantastic new border force czar, has said that we will keep families together and we will deport anybody that's come here illegally. Now, we know you are someone who does support this, but how practical would this be in the United Kingdom? And if you are in favour of deportation, where would you start?
So there are 1.2 million, who knows precisely what the figure is, because they're here illegally, right? So you don't actually know. But I believe there are around, the received wisdom is that there are 1.2 million or so illegal migrants in the United Kingdom. Now, that is a huge number of people to deport, but you have to do it. And the first thing you've got to do is change the Illegal Migration Act back to what it was when it was drafted initially as a bill, which is requiring the Secretary of State to detain and then deport anyone who's entered this country illegally, and anyone who entered this country illegally has no right for asylum. That's a critical framework to have as your legal framework, which is, to all credit to Suella Braverman, that's how she drafted the Illegal Migration Act. By the time the bill became an act, they changed the word from obliged to detain to may detain, which of course is just giving them the right to detain as opposed to obliging the government to detain. But detaining is critical. And I don't buy the argument that we can't build enough prisons. I don't buy it. It's costing us the thick end of £8 billion a year to house the very small number of illegal migrants who've come in over the last few years. Okay, I think there's about 100,000 that are now being housed at the expense of His Majesty's government. And that in total comes to about 8 billion a year. On top of that, you've obviously got benefits that are being paid out as well to people who are here. And I'm told there are 1.5 million foreigners claiming benefits in the United Kingdom. So the economic toll is massive. And therefore, we have the wherewithal to create the prisons required to detain these people when they come to the United Kingdom. So we have to detain them. They cannot be put up in hotels. They cannot roam freely. They have to be detained. That's the first step. And it may take years to do it. That doesn't mean you don't do it. You still take the time to build the prisons, to detain them. And then you have to have a robust deportation program following the law that I just described, because they are here illegally. They have no right to asylum. You can deport them. Now, there are two kinds of deportation. There's deportation to countries with which we have a deportation program. So Pakistan and so on, because we have an arrangement with them to send their nationals back. The problematic ones are countries with which we don't have a program. But let me tell you, Afghanistan will take back its deportees if you send that deportee back with a few £1,000s. The government of Afghanistan will take them back. You don't need some kind of treaty. You just need to incentivize the government to take their own people back. And again, no matter what the bill is, it's cheap at the price. Pay Afghanistan, pay the new lot in Syria, pay the Libyan, whichever regime happens to be in charge at any point in time in Libya, pay them to take back those people that have come to this country. And we don't need a deportation program with them. We just repatriate them together with 2,000 or 3,000 quid or whatever it is that gets the deal done. And that has to start. And no matter how long it takes, Marcus, we must not say we're not going to do it because it's such a massive task. It'll take at least a decade or longer to do it. So what? It takes a decade or longer to do it. You still get on and you start doing it, and you make it clear that that is your program. And the other thing, of course, that we've got to do is enforce our borders. The deportation program is only there to the extent that you fail to enforce your borders. The primary defense, which we haven't deployed in this country, frankly, is to enforce our borders, which is a physical process.
Absolutely. And that's why we call the people that from the Home Office in particular, we've talked about the political parties, but there's a cigarette paper's thickness between the Labour, Tory, really throw SNP, Lib Dems, and Greens in there as well. But another measure that we thought that you could maybe let us know your views on would be to remove the benefits completely.
Absolutely.
People, because when we look at how much Germany spends on its illegal arrivals, it spends about €5,000.
Well, Marcus, I mean, I'm advocating something much more severe than removing their benefits. I'm advocating putting them in jail. They should be detained. When I say detained, I mean, incarcerated until they're deported. And we should build the facilities to incarcerate them.
Well, we should make that may I suggest to you, Ben, that we make that process very, very quick. So when they've been assessed that they're here illegally and that they have no grounds whatsoever to stay here, is that they're removed, because then the average prisoner costs us £45,000 a year.
Yeah,
languishing. And as you mentioned, everybody mentions the $8 billion that the taxpayer has to shoulder by them being here in the hotels, but there's also the loss of revenue that the hotels would be contributing through taxation. There's a loss of jobs. We hear about local people being paid off, and these hotels are employing some of the illegal migrants themselves to do the security work. And then they're very quickly processed through. They're really waved through, as you well know, and they're going out into the care sector, and they're being prioritised in the care sector.
The whole thing is wretched. It has to stop,
So there's a great suggestion, the deportation. You're all behind that. That's something that we're starting to see in the Reform Party as well. Rupert Lowe, we congratulate him. He looks like winning our Herd Immunity News Parliamentarian of the Year. There was a very short list. It was one man. Well, you're not in Parliament yet, and I'm sure you would have given him a good run for his money. But just positive.
Maybe join first.
You would be joined first, neck and neck all the way. But look, just to kind of finish off, we're seeing a massive rise in the Reform Party that's matching the mood across Europe, with the ADF in Germany, Giorgia Meloni doing very well. Obviously, there's support for Mr. Orban in Hungary and his views on protecting his borders. You mentioned Suella Braverman. Her husband has joined Reform, as well as the largest donor one of the largest donors in the country, Nick Candy, who you may have met along the way.
I haven't met him.
You haven't met Nick. Well, no. he's a very interesting and well-meaning chap. Let's put it that way. And then on the spectre, you've got Elon Musk talking about bringing vast sums of money that would completely destroy Labour's funding. What are your views about the sort of change in fortunes, quite literally, for reform?
So I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, but I think the means by which reform succeeds should be consistent with that which it aims to deliver. And what reform stands for is a sovereign, independent, democratic United Kingdom. And I think any means it deploys should be consistent with that fundamental building block. And I'm looking at reform and just slightly quizzically, Nick Candy counts Mandelson and Tony Blair as friends of his. And I couldn't under any circumstances claim I wouldn't be able to think of them as my friends because they've done so much damage. So I'm slightly concerned about that declaration from Nick Candy. And as much as I like what Musk is doing in his support for Trump, Musk is a foreigner. And, if we're serious about being a sovereign country, then I think we should do British politics through British money. And I know that technically he might be able to use a company in the UK. But, if you go down that route, it won't be long before you've got other foreigners influencing our British landscape. And we go from our British form of democracy into one where the Labour Party is taking lots of money from foreigners abroad, albeit illegally through some channel. Not illegally, legally through some channel. And the Conservatives will get on the same bandwagon, and you'll see a completely different kind of democracy in the UK. It'll be much more Americanized. It'll be big ticket, big rich people. And I'm not sure. I don't want to be a detractor.
No, it's great.
I'm not sure that this is the right direction to go in. Reform's roots. For the working class of this country, the people the silent majority, the Brexiteers who screamed out for help, their aims and interests, I dare say it, are not entirely aligned with the interests of lots of billionaires. I'm just saying.
No, it's a great point. It's a great point. And I think what you're trying to do is constructively add to the argument and the betterment of the United Kingdom being a sovereign nation. That was the whole point in Brexit, wasn't it?
That was the whole point of Brexit.
But Trump is actually, he's got Musk on his side, and they're talking about removing themselves on day one from the World Health Organization. For example, I mean, these are the
great.
Amazing. What's not to like? Yeah. and Trump obviously has big problems with China being included in the WTO, and he's a guy that will back his own country. And the other thing that we were going to suggest to you is that how we deal with the French is not give them 500 billion for basically shoving illegals over, is maybe impose trade tariffs on the French. What do you think about that?
I would absolutely. I mean, I would challenge France right to the point of our boats, our navy saying to their navy, no, these dinghies ain't coming in. I would absolutely. What is sovereignty if it isn't a preparedness to defend your country, defend your borders? Borders aren't some kind of theoretical nice to have. They're an absolute prerequisite to define what a nation state is. And we've lost that understanding. Of course, the Europeans don't understand it because they've taken down their borders on the instructions from Brussels, the Schengen zone.
Well, the Germans want to put theirs back, don't they? The Germans are I mean,
I wish them luck.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Miss Maloney tried it, didn't she? She was denied by the courts, the same people, the Gina Millers of the world. They've got their own Gina Millers over there. And we can only really look at Hungary and Mr. Orban. He's actually paying £800 million a year in fines that he's challenged in court. But that's a much better deal than what we've got.
Yeah, better to pay the fines to the EU. To the EU, he's paying the fines, right? And better to pay those fines and protect your country. I mean, actually, he should leave the blooming EU, shouldn't he?
Well, that protectorate model is what Trump is using. And people, the globalist skeptics from the Eurozone that are trailing along at 0.1% growth, Ben, are laughing at him. I mean, and Trump's looking at them saying, are you serious? But that's why we need people like you with a successful track record of business. But not only that, you're patriotic. And we love that about you, that you're completely true blue Brit patriotic. You like me. You like me have I have backgrounds in Italy. You have backgrounds in Pakistan, I think, as well.
Yeah, my dad's Pakistani. Yeah,
your heritage. But it's amazing how you find people like us are the most patriotic Brits that you could find anywhere.
I mean, this country's been. It has been fantastic to me, but that's not why I love it. I love this country because I absolutely just love it. It is the epitome of all things good. I grew up thinking we were on the right side of history throughout every conflict. I know that may be a naive view of, but I'm seriously proud of the United Kingdom. I'm proud of our imperial past. I'm proud of the way we developed common law. We exported trade law. It's still used internationally. We found, the agrarian revolution kicked off in the UK. The industrial revolution kicked off in the UK. So many scientific discoveries came out of the UK. This is a great bloody country, and people need to get behind it and sod everyone else.
Absolutely.
The United Kingdom first.
And we ended slavery. And we put
the end of slavery,
the Nazi regime. We put the Bosch to the Kosh.
Yes.
But all these things are great, and I'm glad that you're still, and I think you will be for the remainder of time, able. You set out the prerequisites for you staying on the political arena, and that was to get our country back.
Yeah, so I'm going to be on the battlefield for a while, I suspect.
Well, as a Brexiteer and someone who ran for the Brexit Party like yourself in 2019, I used to say to people, we've been in the bloody thing for 50 years. It may well take us 50 years
to get out,
to take ourselves out, but eventually we will get out. In the last couple of minutes, Ben, is there anything as a Christmas message? Please, you've given us the good news that Keir Starmer and the regime could be out in the next couple of years with a failure of a balance of payments, complete economic collapse. But the good news is...
That's the good news.
No, sorry, that was the bad news. The good news is, let me get this right. The good news is that he will be, and Rachel Reeves and the whole lot of them, they've never run a bath in their lives. None of them have ever had a proper job. The good news is that they could all be out in a couple of years. But other than that, give us your Christmas message, please, for all that.
I think the really good news is the Trump victory. And now the proof of the pudding is naturally going to be in the eating. And will Trump do for America what he needs to do? What he says he's going to do. If he does it, I think Europe has to follow. Even if it does it kicking and screaming, it has to follow the US, because it'll be just economically absolutely destroyed by a massively supercharged United States. So it has to do it. And in the pursuit of US economic policies, it will also have to put up borders, protect itself, arm itself. We saw Trump saying that he wants NATO spend to go up to 5% of GDP. That may be saber rattling, but we definitely need to up it from the 2%. The 2% ain't protecting Europe. Our militaries are blooming useless across Europe. We need to at least double our military spending across Europe, at least double it, particularly if we're going to fire Storm Shadow missiles into Russia.
Well, Trump looks to be calming that situation down.
Yeah, well, I hope he does calm it down. We want peace, don't we?
Absolutely. And he said, for the sake of British national security, he said Britain should start defending its borders pretty soon.
Yeah.
So I think you're absolutely right. He will set the tone, and the rest of them will have to follow, because
they have to follow.
The businesses will put Starmer's arm up his back and say, I'm sorry. And they'll put Mandy's leg up somewhere. And they'll say, look, the businesses are collapsing, killing off this economy. Listen to what Ben Habib said on Herd Immunity News.
Do it.
And just bloody do it. Well, listen, Ben, thank you so much for appearing on Herd Immunity News.
Good to see you, Marcus.
You're one of our favourite political leaders out there. And we wish you all the best. Have a lovely Christmas and the best for 2025, sir.
Thank you. And you. Thank you. And to all your listeners and viewers.
God bless. Thank you very much, Ben. Take care.
Thank you.